Chapter 14 Masks Part 1. The moment Twilight Sparkle stepped out onto the street level from the tunnels below, she knew something was wrong. About 3 blocks away, roughly where she expected the Iron Circle's tower to be, a column of smoke illuminated by an angry orange glow climbed into the night sky. The ringing of a large bell filled her ears. She stepped out into the street to try and get a better look. The tower stood at the end of the narrow road, dominating a block. Flames spilled from all the windows up to the 4th story, belching black smoke out into the air. She froze in shock, her foreleg cocked mid-step, and stared. Half the building was on fire. "Out of the way!" some pony shouted behind her. Pinkie pulled her back to the side of the street, just in time to avoid 4 ponies galloping past, pulling a cart laden with a massive wooden drum. Water sloshed out its open top as the wheels jumped over bumps in the cobble. She glimpsed red helmets before the cart obscured her view.
"We have to get in there!"
Twilight shouted as Pinkie released her. Launching herself out into the street, she galloped after the cart.
"I'm not going to let my answers burn,"
she thought. The clopping of hooves filled her ears as her friends followed. Rainbow lifted into the air over her head.
"I'll check it out,"
she called over her shoulder before shooting forward with a powerful beat of her wings. She took off after the flames, climbing at a slight angle. Overhead, Twilight saw Pegasi pushing storm clouds into rings around the burning building, dousing the surrounding structures.
"Why aren't they trying to put out the fire?"
she wondered. Catching movement in the corner of her eye, she looked ahead again. A pony came rushing out of a shrine marked with a brass sun at a street corner 2 blocks away from the tower. He wore a star-shaped holy symbol on a cord around his neck. She nearly ran into him as she galloped past. When they reached the base of the tower, earth ponies and unicorns all around them drenched buildings across the street from the blaze with water from buckets and hoof-pumped hoses. They all stayed as far as possible from the burning building. After running through the wash of a hose, Twilight felt the heat on her face. The fire was over 20 hoof spans away, contained inside of the stone exterior of the tower, but through the open double doors at the front, she saw an inferno. Looking at it for a few seconds dried her eyes, and she had to turn away. In the street a distance away from the building, 2 ponies smudged with soot coughed. The cleric she had passed arrived and tended to one of them. Shouting from above drew Twilight's attention. She spotted Rainbow standing on a storm cloud position over one of the 2-story buildings across the street from the tower, facing a Pegasus wearing a blue vest with a red wing sewn onto it.
"Why aren't you doing something to put it out? Drop some rain on it!"
Rainbow yelled. "It's too hot," the Pegasus argued. "The air is rising so fast that it dissipates the clouds. The best we can do is try to keep the whole district from going up."
"There must be ponies trapped on the upper floors. You have to help them,"
Rainbow angrily shouted. "We're weather ponies, not the Flaming Wing Rescue Team. The ponies stuck up there are gonna have to just sit tight until they get here. Now let me do my job," the Pegasus yelled. Twilight rushed toward the pair of survivors, dodging the volunteer firefighters as she went. Applejack and Rarity broke off to lend a helping hoof, but Pinkie and Fluttershy stuck with her. When Twilight reached the pony, she grabbed one of their shoulders with a forehoof to get her attention. The mare looked up at her, revealing an angry burn on the left side of her face.
"What happened?"
Twilight shouted.
I don't know. Smoke and flames came up in the basement and filled the whole 1st floor."
The mare broke down coughing. Fluttershy patted the pony on the back, a glow in her eyes.
"Just breathe," she whispered.
The burned mare sucked in a clean breath.
We were just about to leave to get some drinks. I don't think anybody who was working the late shift got out but us,"
she said. her eyes growing distant and drifting towards the building. Twilight grabbed the mare's unburned cheek, forcing her head back toward her.
Records, ledgers, important ponies. Where are they?
She shouted.
I don't know,
the mare cried.
I'm just a receptionist. There was a meeting on the 8th floor. I think they're still up there.
A commotion drew Twilight's attention, and she released the mare. Ponies looked up at the tower, and she followed their gaze. Above, a unicorn leaned out of a 5th-story window.
Help me!
He screamed, pleading.
It's coming!
Rainbow Dash immediately shot up towards him, cutting a streak of blue through the smoke. But before she could reach the window, the inferno roared. An explosive gout of flame shot out into the night and knocked the unicorn out of the window. He fell, screaming and burning as he plummeted toward the street below. Rainbow raced after him, but Twilight could already tell she wasn't going to catch him in time to slow down. A mere hoof span away from him, Rainbow flared her wings and braked. Twilight reached out for the unicorn with her magic, but he was too far away, and at that distance even her strength waned. Moments after lacing around him, her magic field shattered as he struck the cobblestones with a sickening thud. His blood slowly mixed with the water on the street. Rainbow dragged at the air with her wings, barely stopping in time to avoid crashing into the pavement beside him. After she landed, she closed her eyes tight as she made a strangled sound of frustration and anger. She slammed a forehoof into a puddle, and the red water splashed her coat in return. Twilight stared at the chaos around her in a daze. Applejack stubbornly pulled a cart with a water drum on it toward the tower's open double doors, ignoring the protests of the ponies around her. Her dragon scale armor shielded her from the heat. They couldn't follow to stop her. She stopped, repositioned, and bucked the drum off the cart. The water sloshed out into the doorway, but only vaporized in a burst of steam. The blaze raged on.
This isn't supposed to be happening,
she thought. She looked up at the 5th floor. Smoke spilled from all of its windows. The fire was climbing. If they went in, even with spell protections against the heat, they wouldn't be able to breathe the dead air.
What are we gonna do, Twilight?
Pinkie asked. Twilight shook her head, breaking free from her daze.
This is my best shot at finding him, and I'm not going to let it slip away,
she decided. The smoke and embers spilling out of the windows climbed at an angle, carried away by a stiff breeze. She could still see the top of the tower.
I should be able to breathe up there,
she thought. She focused on a spot above the rooftop and reached for her magic.
I'm going up,
she said.
Twilight!
Whatever Pinkie was going to say to her, it was lost as she teleported away. Her dimension door spell dumped her out into the air above the rooftop, higher than she would ever consider jumping from. She plummeted, flailing at the air with her hooves. When she landed, she crumpled to the side and slammed into the masoned stone. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Gasping, she looked around from her position on her side. A low stone wall topped in iron spikes bordered the flat rooftop area she had landed on. She focused on a closed door that led into a tower. With a groan, she picked herself up, knowing that she would have another collection of bruises. She approached the door, peering at it. Metal points poked through it around the handle. Some pony had nailed it shut from the far side. With a slash from Celestial Fury, she cut it open.
They must not have wanted to let any pony in. Or out,
she thought as she rushed down the narrow stairway beyond the door. Wisps of gray smoke clung to the ceiling, and the dry air bit at her lungs. She moved as quickly as she could. The Pegasi outside were doing everything in their power to get the breeze under control before it could spread the flames. When they did, There would be nothing but smoke, even in the upper floors. She pushed open a door at the bottom of the stairs and stepped out onto a landing. A mirrored pair of wide staircases split off from the landing and descended to the floors below. To her right, she saw a closed pair of ornate doors. She wondered if any pony was still up here.
All I need is one pony who knows what's going on,
she thought. She hoped that meeting was important, and that she would find the ponies who ran the Iron Circle cowering on the far side of the door. A dark fantasy of forcing them to answer her questions, then leaving them to burn entered her mind.
They would deserve it,
she thought, as she threw the doors open. On the far side, in a large room with wide windows, 7 ponies slumped against a long, narrow table with goblets of wine spilled beside them. They were finely dressed, well-groomed, and still as the grave. An 8th sat at the head of the table, swirling his goblet in a hoof. "Twilight Sparkle," he greeted her. "How goes the hunt?"
What happened?
Twilight growled, advancing with her swords drawn.
Why are they dead?
He laughed, a black cackle void of any true emotion. Them? Oh, they knew too much. He laughed again. Poof! Nothing in their heads anymore.
Tell me what you know, or I'll cut you into 1,000 pieces. Slowly,
she said. It was no empty threat. He grinned. Even if you could, you wouldn't have enough time before the flames got here. Still, it's a game I would rather not play. He took a sip of wine.
Poison,
she realized. Twilight lunged forward and leapt onto the table, but it was already done. He slumped forward. There's nothing to find here. He wheezed with his last breath.
No,
Twilight thought. It was all too similar to her confrontation with Hey Brittle. She was so close, only to have her victory whisked away by the fragility of her enemies.
They were supposed to be alive!
She roared. In her fury, she slammed the table with her hooves. Then, with a clean stroke, she split the head of the corpse that had haunted her in life. His red blood oozed out of his open skull, coating the table and staining her hooves.
I wanted to kill them!
She screamed. She kicked the fallen goblet away from his hoof. There had been no way to stop it. He must have been drinking it before she even got into the room for it to act so fast. She had nothing, no revenge, no answers. She coughed, something scratching at her throat. She picked up the body at the end of the table in her magic and launched it through one of the windows. It smashed through the metal framework girding the small glass plates in the window and fell, broken and mutilated, out into the night.
You stole them from me!
She weakly cried, her rage ebbing away, leaving her with only crushing disappointment. She sagged, collapsing down onto the table, and coughed. The mixture of wine and blood on the wood soaked into her fur. In her anger, she hadn't noticed the room filling with smoke. She could see it billowing outside the windows.
They must have gotten the wind under control,
she thought. She was out of time. She struggled to her hooves and staggered toward the broken window. All she needed was a glimpse of the ground and she could teleport down. She felt tears in her eyes, but they evaporated before they could build and roll down her cheeks.
Twilight?
A voice said from behind her. She recognized it as Fluttershy's. Twilight turned, blinking away the stinging smoke, and saw Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash moving toward her. The smoke fled at their approach, and a sphere of clean air projected around Fluttershy engulfed her.
What are you doing up here?
Twilight asked, gasping.
We flew up,
Rainbow said.
Pinkie tried to climb the tower and come with, but the sides are too hot. She was so worried about you. You have got to stop running off on your own, Twi.
She looked around the room, peering through the smoke.
Why are they all dead? Did you kill them? Was that what the shouting was about?
Twilight shook her head.
They were dead when I got here. All but one. I think he murdered the rest so that they wouldn't tell me anything. Then he killed himself.
She looked at Rainbow.
How many floors are burning? 6,
Rainbow said. There was something in the look Rainbow gave her, but Twilight couldn't tell if it was horror, pity, or concern.
Maybe there's still hope,
Twilight thought. She pushed past her despair, and her mind focused to a razor-sharp edge of purpose.
I can still find something that will lead me to him,
she told herself.
There has to be some records, or something. How long can you keep the smoke away, Fluttershy?
Fluttershy looked down at her hooves.
At least 10 minutes, I think,
she said. Twilight gestured at the area of clean air around them.
I didn't know you could do this. I didn't either until it came up,
Fluttershy said.
I needed the air to be clean to find you, and it was. How?
Twilight started to ask, but stopped herself mid-question.
Never mind, it works. We need to go downstairs and see if we can find something.
She trotted forward.
What are we trying to find? I don't know,
Twilight admitted, pausing at the edge of the rubble of clear air for Fluttershy to catch up.
Anything. Documents? Somebody that knows something? It doesn't matter.
The stairway they descended down was mercifully clear. The other was responsible for filling the 8th floor with smoke. They found a group of 3 ponies huddled in a corner on the 7th floor stairwell.
How long have you been here?
Twilight asked. I don't know, a few minutes, one of them answered. We went up to the roof to try and get out, but the access door was nailed shut. Can you believe that? We couldn't get it open without tools, so we came back down, but... He looked down the stairs. The steps beyond were collapsed. Daisy said we should wait here for rescue, he said as he glanced at the mirror beside him. Are you here to get us out?
You bet,
Rainbow said.
What's your job? Do you know anything about the trade crisis?
Twilight asked. What? No, he said, shaking his head. We work mail. We take letters from the magic mirrors and get them where they need to go.
Do you read any of them?
Only if we wanted to get fired. Or worse, he said. He peered at Twilight. Wait a second. You're Twilight Sparkle! He scrambled back. You're dangerous!
Not to you, but if you don't tell me what I want to know, I might be.
Twilight said.
Where do you keep records? They're on this floor,
Daisy said.
Down the hall, second door on the left.
She looked up at Twilight, fear in her eyes.
Please, don't hurt us. Thanks,
Twilight said, turning away.
Rainbow, stay with them. We'll head up together when Fluttershy and I get back, and figure out how to get every pony down when we can. Got it,
Rainbow said. Before heading out of the stairwell, Twilight cast a spell. A ring of icy blue flames surrounded her and Fluttershy, shielding them from the heat. She walked down the corridor with Fluttershy beside her, their hooves clicking on the stone floor.
How can the fire climb so fast if the floor is stone?
She wondered. The walls to either side were wooden, except for supporting columns. If the other floors were like this one, the fire would have plenty of fuel, but the stone floor should slow its progress. She had seen the flames engulf the entire 5th floor in a matter of seconds, as if something explosive were stored there. They passed bodies in the hall, revealed as Fluttershy's spell pushed away the smoke. There were no burns. They had been poisoned by the dead air. Twilight stepped over them and kept her eyes forward. As they reached the second door on the left, Twilight noticed Fluttershy glaring at her.
What?
She asked, pausing in front of the door.
Nothing.
Fluttershy murmured. An angel bit her ear from his position on her back. Fluttershy winced.
Weren't you, a little mean to those ponies back there? And to the one you questioned at the bottom of the tower?
Twilight sighed.
Maybe. But we don't have time for this.
She pulled the door open. A blast of heat greeted her, passing through the blue flames in front of her as if the fire shield wasn't even there. She felt the exposed skin around her lips and nostrils singe. In the center of the room, a vaguely pony-shaped creature hovered, engulfed in a blazing inferno. Beneath it was a crater blown through the floor. Around it, open cabinets full of papers burned. It turned to look at her, its eyes black spots in the flames. She slammed the door shut.
Fire elemental! Greater, probably, definitely not lesser.
She thought, her mind scrambling.
Run!
She cried. She knew they couldn't fight the creature here, submerged in its element. Grabbing Fluttershy, she took off down the corridor. The records were nothing but ashes now, but one more plan formed in her mind. There was a cleric at the base of the tower and 7 bodies of ponies important to the organization on the 8th floor. If the cleric could cast the same Speak with Dead spell Lyra did back at the Helping Hoof, and they could get a body to him before it was too late, then there might still be hope. She spared a glance over her shoulder as they neared the stairwell. A gout of flames blasted the door to the records room off its hinges. The form of the elemental glowed through the smoke as it floated out into the hallway. They burst out into the stairwell, and Twilight stopped in shock. Rainbow stood over 3 bodies, blood dripping from one of her wing blades. Daisy lay unmoving on the floor in front of her with a deep wound in her side and a bloody letter opener in her mouth. The 2 other ponies appeared to have died from neck wounds.
I didn't mean to,
Rainbow said, distraught. Twilight lowered part of the ring of blue flames, allowing Rainbow to enter as she moved forward.
We have to get to the roof,
she yelled. Rainbow stared at Daisy's body.
Come on!
Twilight shouted as she shoved Rainbow with her shoulder. Rainbow stumbled and started to move. They reached the 8th floor a moment later. Twilight dipped into the meeting room, guiding her 2 friends with her. She breathed a sigh of relief when she found the bodies unburned. She grabbed one of the corpses floating up beside her and headed for the roof. As they ascended the narrow staircase, she felt heat on her hind hooves. When she reached the roof, Twilight tossed the corpse into a far corner and faced the doorway.
We have to fight it here,
she said as she began to cast a spell.
It'll keep spreading the fire until it's stopped.
She closed her eyes, focusing. When she had prepared the spell, it had been nearly at the limits of her ability, and it was equally difficult to complete. When she finished it, the world around her passed by at half the speed. It was a stronger version of the haste spell she had used before, but it only affected her, altering her passage through time. Smoke filled the air around them, except for the area kept clear by Fluttershy, but at least there were no flames.
We might be able to beat it out here,
Twilight thought.
even with just the 3 of us.
Beside Twilight, Angel jumped off Fluttershy's back, and her eyes glowed. Storm clouds rushed in from beyond this cloud of smoke billowing around them and engulfed Angel, lifting him and turning him into a creature of water, wind, and lightning. Electricity crackled within his form as he took up a position in front of the door.
4 of us,
Twilight corrected herself. The small stone structure capping the top of the stairs exploded outward as the fire elemental burst onto the roof, launching chunks of masonry. With a beat of her wings, Rainbow flew upward, clear of the debris. Twilight ducked the stone and caught another in her magic. Beside her, Fluttershy's cloak manifested into a barrier of wood and bark, deflecting the rocks. The door hit Angel, but he didn't even flinch. After tossing the stone aside, Twilight advanced. Ahead of her, Angel met the fire elemental head-on. Thunder boomed, slow and deep in Twilight's ears, as he clashed with the creature's pony-shaped core. They struggled against each other like 2 massive titans, lethargic and ponderous due to her slow-motion perception of the world. She moved closer, using Angel's body to shield herself from the staggering heat. As she approached, the fire elemental edged a hoof past Angel's thundercloud body and shot a ray of fire at her. With the help of her spell, she dove to the ground and rolled out of the way. While she got back to her feet, she glimpsed Rainbow turning in a tight circle, whipping around at a rate that was still impressive even when cut in half. A vortex built in the center of the circle, forming from the eddies bleeding off of Rainbow's wings. Back on all fours, Twilight darted to the side and lashed out with celestial fury. She caught one of the creature's hind legs as it grappled with Angel, severing it clean through. From the point of contact, a golden aura spread and held the elemental in place. The smell of burning hair and flesh filled her nostrils as she singed in the heat, and she ducked back behind Angel. With the storm cloud shielding her from the blaze, she started to cast a spell. The base of Rainbow's vortex met the held fire elemental. It pulled away the flames surrounding the creature and sent them skyward, leaving behind nothing but its blackened body. The whirlwind burst with the flames and sent Rainbow sailing backwards through the air. She gave Twilight a small salute as she fell past the edge of the rooftop. The creature writhed free of the golden aura. Twilight lunged forward, taking the opportunity to strike. At point-blank range, she completed her spell. A blast of icy shards erupted from her horn and riddled the black figure with holes. The perforated corpse turned to ash in Angel's grasp. Its head hit the rooftop and dissipated, revealing a red orb. Twilight released the haste spell as she picked up the orb and stowed it in her pack. She turned away, and Angel shrank back down to his usual size.
That could have gone worse,
Twilight said, sheathing her swords.
Good work, every pony.
Angel glared at her.
And rabbit,
she added. Her face hurt. She lifted a hoof and rubbed at her cheek. It came away bloody, with blackened hairs stuck to it.
We'd better get down,
Rainbow said, staring at Twilight. She nodded.
Right.
She hefted the body, and with her second prepared dimension door, teleported down to street level. This time, she appeared standing on solid stones. A puddle of water pooled around her. She lifted the corpse off her back and floated it beside her.
Darling, your face!
Rarity cried as she approached.
What happened?
Twilight glanced down. She saw her reflection in the water, illuminated by the glow of the flames. Her face was a mottled patchwork of blackened fur and exposed, bloodied skin.
It hurts to blink,
she realized.
Fire elemental. I'll explain later,
Twilight said.
Where's the cleric?
Rarity pointed down the street. The cleric stood over a corpse covered with a blanket, his head bowed in prayer. Twilight walked toward him.
Can you cast Speak with Dead?
She asked, looking around for the 2 survivors she had seen earlier. turned my back for a second and one of them murdered the other. Crushed her windpipe, the cleric said, his voice heavy with sorrow. She ran off into the night. Twilight hardly heard what he was saying. At the moment, it wasn't useful information. She stepped forward and grabbed him by the shoulder.
Can you cast Speak with Dead?
She repeated. He eyed her, concerned. Do you need help? He asked.
Just answer the question,
Twilight said, ignoring the pain that was spreading across her face like an inferno. He nodded slowly.
Good. Will here do, or do you need an altar?
Twilight asked.
What she means to say is we'll give you a generous donation to question the body,
Rarity said. Twilight stared at a mosaic on the wall of the shrine, keeping her eyes open to avoid the sting that came with moving her eyelids. In a series of images, the mosaic depicted two alicorns guiding a mixed coalition of ponies across a land bridge to the island of Manhattan. She recognized one of the alicorns as Planetos the Wanderer, a dead demigod, but the other was too abstract to identify. She hissed when Fluttershy's hoof brushed a sensitive spot on her face, but a moment later all the pain faded away. Twilight blinked her dry eyes and felt nothing but relief.
Thank you,
she said.
Sorry, I had to be careful or you wouldn't look right,
Fluttershy said. Twilight turned toward the altar at the head of the shrine. The cleric was finally prepared to begin. She looked at him expectantly, and he cast a spell, touching his hoofs to the body. The body jerked as its eyes filled with a golden light, but the cleric fell back, collapsing. Twilight rushed over.
Something's wrong. It doesn't work like this,
she thought. Behind the altar, the cleric held his metal holy symbol in his mouth and scraped the wooden floor beneath him. His eyes were still glowing. Rainbow, Applejack, and Pinky crowded in behind Twilight while he sketched something into the floorboards.
Is he okay?
Pinky asked. I don't know, Applejack said.
Should we wake him up?
Rainbow asked, moving forward. Applejack held out a hoof to stop her. No. Best to let it play out. It could hurt him if you tried to break the spell. A moment later, the glow faded, and the cleric rolled onto his back. I'm sorry, he said. That's all there was. He shut his eyes tight and held his head in his forehoofs. Twilight stared at the sketch. A collection of straight lines arranged in a pattern, and a couple of numbers were inscribed on the floor.
That can't be all there is,
Twilight said. You said he was poisoned, right? The cleric said, curled up on the floor. It must have burned away at his mind, or something. All that was left was that image. Twilight pressed a piece of parchment against the floor and made a rubbing with a charcoal stick.
It has to mean something,
she thought.
Well, thanks,
she muttered, turning away.
All that, and this is all I have to show for it,
she thought while she stared at the sketch. It seemed like every conceivable force conspired against her. Someone had deliberately destroyed the Iron Circle's headquarters to hide the truth from her. She couldn't even begin to piece together what had happened or why the ponies in the building murdered each other. But the fire elemental was no accident. It had been summoned for a purpose. I feel like I've seen you ponies someplace, the cleric said. Nope, Applejack said, too quickly. I can't think of any way you could have seen our faces before right now. Twilight heard the cleric climb to his feet behind her. No, no, you're definitely familiar. I'm sure it'll come back to me when my head clears.
Well, I think it's time for us to go,
Rarity said, ushering them out the door. Oh, bye. I'm sorry I couldn't be of more help, but thank you for the donation, the cleric called after them. As they left, Rarity discreetly ripped down one of the wanted flyers nailed to a signpost near the shrine. We'll be pardoned come morning, Applejack said.
These are still giving our faces far more attention than I would like,
Rarity said as she ripped the poster into fragments and tossed it into the gutter beside the street. As they walked away from the shrine, Twilight noticed Rainbow lingering. The Pegasus stared back at the smoldering tower.
Are you okay, Rainbow?
She asked. I'm fine. Rainbow nodded, trotting after her. They walked in silence down the street, a bit behind the group.
I didn't mean to kill her,
Rainbow said.
The mayor?
Twilight asked. Rainbow nodded again.
I thought I heard shouting from down the stairs, and I flew past the collapsed section to check it out. There was no pony there, and when I came back, I found one of the ponies with his throat cut open, and the other fighting Daisy off while she stabbed the letter opener into the side of his neck, and...
She paused, hesitating before the next word.
Twisted.
Rainbow sighed, closing her eyes tight.
I snapped. It was just too horrible to watch. I was too late to stop her, so I killed her.
She opened her eyes and focused intently on Twilight.
There's something really bad going on here, Twilight. Worse than anything we've seen before.
Twilight leaned against Rainbow as they walk, comforting and drawing comfort. In the moment, what had happened in the tower didn't faze her. But now that the drive to find answers was gone, it left her chilled. She could still hear the laugh of the pony at the head of the table echoing in her ears. And she knew Rainbow was right.